Theresa May is to become the first foreign leader to meet Donald Trump, hoping to open the way to a trade deal after Brexit. But will, in Mrs May's words, opposites attract after President Trump's controversial support for waterboarding? We'll be live in Washington and in Westminster, asking each side what they hope to achieve in this crucial first meeting, also this lunchtime. Plans to ration knee and hip surgery in Worcestershire to save money are described as alarming by surgeons. Tesco's share price has risen sharply after the supermarket chain said it was buying the food wholesaler Booker. 6 years in jail for the former judge and his assistant who defrauded their own law firm out of hundreds of thousands of pounds. And could Rafa Nadal be the latest comeback kid as he fights for a place in the men's Grand Slam final in Australia?
And here in the south, from space to Sussex, Chichester astronaut Tim Peake returns home to visit an exhibition about himself and helping them to treat themselves, the new therapy for teenagers who self-harm.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. Theresa May is preparing to meet Donald Trump in the White House in a few hours' time, the first foreign leader to visit since Mr Trump became president. Global security and a trade deal after Brexit are likely to be high on the agenda. In a speech to US Republicans last night, Mrs May said the UK and America could not return to failed military interventions to try to remake the world. Her visit comes amid ongoing controversy over President Trump's support for the waterboarding of terror suspects and his war of words with Mexico over the building of a border wall. Here's our correspondent, Richard Lister.
She'll hope the blustery conditions aren't a portent for the meeting to come. Washington has rolled out the red carpet for Theresa May, but the Prime Minister will have to tread carefully with a controversial president who's used to getting his own way. Her priority is to lay the groundwork for a trade deal with the US to counterbalance Britain's departure from the EU. On the quayside in Liverpool, cars bound for the United States and construction equipment too. President Trump has promised a building boom, and Britain wants a part of that.
For us as a company, ACL, if we can get a slice of that, we can export the goods that he needs to carry on with that construction he's looking at.
Britain's trading relationship with the United States is already a healthy one. The value of our exports to the US is £45 billion. That's a fifth of UK global exports. And we sell them more than we buy, with imports totalling £35 billion. We export more to the US than we do to any other country, but we're only America's fifth biggest market. We need them more than they need us. In his first week as president, Donald Trump has said repeatedly his strategy will be buy American, hire American. And although he wants bilateral trade deals, they'll come with conditions attached.
We want to deal with the ones that treat us well. And if they don't treat us well, we terminate, or we give them a 30-day notice of termination. And then they come back and they want to renegotiate during that 30 days, and we get a better deal.
And until we leave the EU, only Brussels can make UK trade deals. The Chancellor's there today, and he accepted Britain's hands are currently tied.
We will continue to abide by the rules and the regulations and the laws of the European Union for so long as we are members. So of course we want to strengthen our trade ties with the very many trade partners we have around the world, but we're very mindful of our obligations under the treaty and we will follow them precisely.
And for now, the key players in Europe are wary of what Mr Trump has to offer.
Let's speak frankly, there are challenges that the US administration poses to our trade rules. So we of course have to talk to Donald Trump, he was elected. But we also have to promote our interests and values as Europeans.
Back in Liverpool, this golden eagle marks the US consulate established here in 1790, a reminder of long-standing Anglo-American trade ties. Today, though, it's a French restaurant. That's a reminder the relationship can't be taken for granted.
The assumption that everything will be fine with British trade is assuming that Trump and his administration are rational actors, that they're going to behave rationally. But they might not.
The picture may become a little clearer later today. Richard Lister, BBC News.
Well, in a moment, we'll get the latest from Westminster, but first to Washington to our correspondent Barbara Plett-Usher. And Barbara, Theresa May is the first foreign leader to visit. Does this mean that the special relationship does count for something there?
Well, you know, I just asked Donald Trump's spokeswoman that question, and she said, yes, the special relationship is as important to America as it is to Britain. She said Mr. Trump would use this meeting to assure Mrs. May of that. And like Mr. Trump, she made the comparison between Brexit and his election. She said both leaders have been propelled into power, into leadership by a populist wave that wants to shake up establishment institutions. But frankly, I mean, it's obvious that there's much more at stake here for Mrs. May than there is for Mr. Trump, because Britain's other strategic relationship, main strategic relationship with the European Union is in flux. She can't really afford to have this strategic relationship look like it's getting any weaker. She needs to show that it's actually getting stronger to demonstrate that Britain has options outside of the EU. But whatever Mr. Trump might say about similarities, he is quite different in the sense that he's a protectionist, he's a hard nationalist, and Mrs. May is not. And so she's already tried to encourage him not to turn his back on the world. I think she'll continue that today. And then there's the question of how much she wants a personal special relationship with this man who is criticized, even reviled in Britain for his positions from everything from Muslims and women to torture. So that news conference later today will be an important test of how she's going to handle this relationship.
And Carol in Westminster, what has Mrs. May got to do to come away from feeling that this first meeting was a success?
Well, I think the Prime Minister will want to establish that personal relationship, a rapport with the new American president. She will want to build the basis for a future trade deal, and she'll want to, frankly, navigate her way through this minefield of different areas where she and the American president profoundly disagree. As you heard there, they are two very different characters, but on the plane on the way over, Theresa May said, well, sometimes opposites can attract. And I think she will want to look to economic ties to build on President Trump's offer to put Britain at the front of the queue when it comes to a future bilateral trade deal. But then you come to these really difficult, contentious issues. Torture. President Trump has said that he would be prepared to allow waterboarding in the fight against terrorism, although some senior figures in his team disagree. Theresa May has said that would cause huge problems for future cooperation on defence and intelligence. So it will be a real test of Theresa May's diplomatic skills, whether she can build that personal relationship without appearing too much to pander to a man with such contentious views, so she'd then face a backlash when she gets home.
Carol in Westminster, many thanks, and to Barbara Plett-Usher too in Washington. And you can, of course, see full coverage of Theresa May's visit to Washington on the BBC News channel, including that news conference with Donald Trump, which is expected around 6 o'clock. The Royal College of Surgeons says plans to cut knee and hip replacement operations in Worcestershire are alarming. 3 commissioning groups in the county say very obese patients and those who are only in moderate pain will not qualify for the surgery. They say the plan will save £2 million a year and bring them into line with other parts of the country. Here's our health correspondent, Robert Piggott.
At 5 feet 10 inches and weighing a little over 18 stone, Gordon Wainwright of Malvern in Worcestershire can no longer expect swift access to the second hip replacement he needs. The pain from Mr. Wainwright's osteoarthritis wakes him up at night and his mobility is badly compromised. But new restrictions on surgery mean he'd have to lose 10% of his weight before he could qualify for surgery.
It's a very, very sharp pain, very sharp pain in my hip. It's not an ache, it's very, very sharp. Literally, if I turn over, everybody's like, I mean, I haven't really been fully fit in terms of being able to walk properly or just go for a walk for what? Pre-2013? It would dramatically change my life.
The first total hip replacement was carried out in an English hospital in 1962. More than 50 years on, this revolutionary procedure is being widely rationed. The clinical commissioning groups in Wyre Forest, Redditch and Bromsgrove and South Worcestershire will exclude from hip and knee replacements patients who rank as morbidly obese or those whose pain is not sufficiently severe to interfere with their daily life. The Royal College of Surgeons says the restrictions are not clinically justified and will often be a false economy.
The patient continues to be in pain, he needs painkillers, he needs physiotherapy, he may be unable to work. And he'll be in severe pain for a long period of time. And also, By waiting, the operation may indeed become more difficult when he eventually gets it.
The clinical commissioning group said they were bringing Worcestershire into line with what other CCGs do. They said if a patient feels they require this surgery but do not meet these criteria, there is a clear appeal system. Several other commissioning groups in England, including in Harrogate, the Vale of York, Shropshire and the south coast of Kent, are imposing similar restrictions on non-emergency surgery. Demand for hip and knee replacements is growing with an ageing population, but the money to pay for them is increasingly scarce. Robert Piggott, BBC News.
The families of 4 people who were killed by a runaway tipper truck in Bath have been describing the impact that the accident has had on their lives. 4 people died when they were hit by a lorry which had defective brakes. The owner of the haulage company, Matthew Gordon, and a mechanic, Peter Wood, were convicted of manslaughter last year and are being sentenced today. John Kay reports now from Bristol Crown Court. John.
Yeah, these 4 families sitting together in the courtroom here, holding hands, supporting one another, taking it in turns each to read out these victim impact statements. And some of the words extremely moving, difficult to listen to, some of them, very emotional, very honest. And in the dock, a few feet away, the 2 men who were convicted of manslaughter just before Christmas, Matthew Gordon and Peter Wood, who will be sentenced this afternoon. They all lost their lives in a matter of seconds. 4-year-old Mitzi Steady, chauffeur Steve Vaughan and businessmen Philip Allen and Robert Parker. Killed by a 32-ton truck, its brakes had failed while coming down a steep hill into the city of Bath. Just before Christmas, these men were found guilty on 4 counts of manslaughter. On the left, Matthew Gordon, who ran the Grittenham Haulage Company. And on the right, Peter Wood, a mechanic whose job was to check the lorry. Pictures of the vehicle's brakes were shown in court. The jury was told they were badly worn, rusty and in a poor state of repair. The trial heard the company was a shambles, failing to carry out proper safety checks. Today, relatives of those who were killed have told the court how their lives have been affected. The mother of Mitzi Steady said her family is bereft and she finds it a struggle to go on without Mitzi's laughter and singing filling their home. Mitzi's grandmother, who was also hit by the truck, needed to have both her legs amputated. She described the physical and emotional pain she's been left with, saying life has changed completely. The wife of Steve Vaughan told the court about the moment she went to see her husband's body. She said as she held him, she played songs that they'd only recently played at their wedding.
It's just been a horrendous time.
At the end of the trial, she told me about the void now in her life.
We were only married for 6 months, and especially having to spend your first wedding anniversary alone was just so far removed from the one that we had planned. It's just been absolutely horrendous.
The widow of Phil Allen said she had been robbed of her soulmate in a horrific accident that should never have happened. She said those responsible had shown a total disregard for the rules of the road. And Robert Parker's widow said she'd thought of nothing else since the moment he was killed by the runaway truck. She said the reckless actions of others means her life will never be the same. Well, Matthew Gordon, who ran that haulage company, will be sentenced this afternoon. He'd said during the original trial last year that he was dyslexic and that caused him problems in running the company. But perhaps one of the most poignant moments here in court today was when Sian Vaughan, who you heard speaking in my piece, looked him in the eye, talking about the death of her husband, and said, look, I am dyslexic too, but I've never made that an excuse for many of my actions. Matthew Gordon and Peter Wood sentenced here this afternoon. Rita.
John, thank you. A former judge and his assistant have been jailed for 6 years for defrauding their own law firm out of more than £600,000. The pair siphoned off the money to pay for a lavish lifestyle. Let's speak now to our correspondent Dan Johnson, who's at Southwark Crown Court for us now. And Dan, tell us more about the details of what they did.
Well, homes, holidays to Barbados, a Range Rover, even a log cabin with a hot tub. These are just some of the luxuries that were on the list of things bought with this money that Simon Kenny and Emma Coates took from their own law firm, from CK Solicitors in Chelsea in Sussex. The judge said that they had used the firm in effect as their own personal piggy bank. Now, this began as a way of propping up the firm, of keeping it solvent, but it then extended to treating the solicitor and his assistant, who he was having an affair with at the time. The judge said that Miss Coates was drawn to excess and extravagance, and if there was money there for the taking, she took it. The judge who laid down the sentence said it was difficult to imagine a more spectacular breach of trust. One theft involved £85,000 being taken from the will of an elderly woman. Now, they told colleagues in the law firm that they were moving the money offshore because of the banking crisis, to keep it safe. And one particularly sad aspect of this case has been that the company accountant belatedly realised what was going on and that he'd been duped by the pair. He then took his own life, and the judge in sentencing the pair said that they would have to deal with that for the rest of their lives. There's a third employee called Stephen Heisman who is yet to be sentenced for his part in this fraud, and the deputy district judge that Simon Kenny was in his previous life and a solicitor, the judge said that meant that he had brought shame on the entire legal profession. He's had to be kept in special protection at the local prison where he's awaited this sentence because word had got round about what he used to do.
Dan, thank you. Dan Johnson there. The time is 16 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. Theresa May is preparing to meet Donald Trump, the first world leader to meet the new president. And still to come, the profoundly deaf boy whose family escaped Iraq, now facing deportation from the UK.
And coming up on South Today at 1:30, helping them to treat themselves, the new therapy for teenagers who self-harm. And teed off, the golfers angry after their club is forced to close because the council decides to end its lease early.
Tesco, the UK's largest retailer, has agreed to buy Britain's largest food wholesaler, Booker, in a deal worth £3.7 billion. It would mean Tesco gaining a massive share in supplying restaurants, pubs and convenience stores in the UK. News of the deal sent shares soaring in both companies. Here's our business correspondent, Emma Simpson.
Tesco already has the lion's share of the UK's grocery business. Now it's got its sights on serving even more customers. It struck a deal to buy Booker. You may not have heard of it, but this wholesaler supplies thousands of pubs, restaurants, caterers and corner shops. This market's growing faster than selling groceries in the supermarkets, and Tesco wants a slice of it.
What we do see, Charles and I, is
the two company bosses side by side for a webcast this morning to explain why this surprise £3.7 billion deal makes sense.
The ability to improve the core offer of both the retail operation but also the independent and small business operation that Charles currently serves is definitely going to drive growth. That better choice, better range, better value, better price.
But what will the wider impact be? Booker doesn't own these convenience stores, but they do own the brands, and they supply all the goods to the independent retailers who run them.
Tesco has about 10% of the convenience and on-the-go food market today in our estimates. Booker has a similar share, or probably even bigger, of the convenience market. And so clearly Tesco supplying both of them will make it a bigger force in convenience retail.
That may prompt some concerns, including from the competition authorities, who are likely to scrutinise this deal. If approved, it's a big, bold move by Tesco, extending its already formidable reach. Emma Simpson, BBC News.
The Church of England should not change its teaching on marriage as the lifelong union of one man and one woman, according to the House of Bishops, which forms part of the General Synod. It said there was little support for same-sex marriage inside the Church, but urged a fresh tone of welcome and support for lesbian and gay people. It acknowledged its findings could cause serious and painful disagreements. Here's our religious affairs correspondent, Martin Bashir.
For an ancient institution, 3 years of so-called shared conversations about same-sex relationships were not expected to radically alter church doctrine. And today's report from the House of Bishops lands squarely on the status quo, that marriage is a lifelong union between a man and a woman. The bishop who led the working group says that while the doctrine doesn't change, the church must adapt its tone.
It's not against the impact of cultural change. We uphold the authority of Scripture, the tradition of the church, in common with the vast and overwhelming majority of churches around the world. But what we want to do is to engage with the culture of which we are part. That culture has changed radically.
But lesbian and gay members of the church have reacted with disappointment, accusing the bishops of doing nothing to acknowledge the goodness or sanctity of lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender relationships.
Substantially no change in terms of the doctrine of marriage. A little bit of warmth, a little tilt perhaps in the direction of greater inclusion, but we're a long way from that yet. But I think that's pretty much what most people expected. It's a sort of classic Anglican fudge and a sideways step and a nudge in a different patch of the long grass perhaps.
Conservative evangelicals, however, have expressed relief that the bishops have upheld the authority of Scripture against the impact of cultural change.
I want the church to stand with the teaching of Jesus, and my understanding is Jesus taught very clearly that sex is for marriage and marriage is between a man and a woman. So I want the church to continue to teach what Jesus taught on that issue, to try and find ways of commending that lovingly to the world around us.
This report will be debated at General Synod, which begins in just over 2 weeks' time. Martin Bashir, BBC News at Church House in London.
There's been a big increase in the number of people being declared insolvent. The figures for England and Wales show there were more than 90,000 insolvencies last year, an increase of more than 13% on the year before. Well, our personal finance correspondent Simon Gompertz is with me now. And Simon, why is this the case?
Well, figures are also telling us that people are putting more on their credit cards, in personal loans and overdrafts, and there's a feeling that that's fueling our shopping boom at the moment, perhaps unsustainably, and it could be one of the reasons. It's something that the Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, has warned that we need to be vigilant about, and if serious debt gets people into trouble, well, the result is a formal insolvency, and those are the figures that it's 91,000 in the last year, a rise of 13%, as you said, and within that there's a 23% rise in what are called individual voluntary arrangements, IVAs, which is the most flexible form, so a lot of people moving into that. On the other hand, though, it went to a low after the recession which followed the financial crisis, and we're still about 30% below the numbers at that time. So it's not the worst it's been. And also bankruptcy, debt relief orders, another formal arrangement, and these IVAs, they've all become easier to do, and debt advisors have been pushing people in those directions. So some of it could be not so much people getting more into debt, but more people doing something about it, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Simon, thank you. The Hamad Amin family fled Iraq in 2015 because they were afraid that their profoundly deaf son would be killed by so-called Islamic State. He's now at a British school learning sign language. But the family are facing deportation to Germany because they entered the UK illegally. Seema Katecha has the story.
My name.
6-year-old Lawand was born deaf. He had a cochlear implant fitted when he was 18 months old. Now, for the first time, he's able to communicate how he's feeling through British Sign Language, after learning it here at the Royal School for the Deaf in Derby.
He's had to go right back from scratch, learning English, to learn to read and to write, and then learn sign language as well. And he's gone from reading nothing to being of an age 4.
The family fled Iraq after so-called Islamic State threatened to kill disabled children. They then spent a year living in a camp in Germany before making their way to France and then to England on the back of a lorry.
My life and my family's lives were in danger, so we had no other option but to leave Iraq and travel to Europe.
So when you see your son communicating so fluently now in sign language, how does that make you feel?
I am happy that my child is making progress in his life. Whatever I can do, I will do it for him. And I feel ecstatic when I see he has progressed so dramatically.
They were going to be sent back to Germany last week. Ministers had argued they should apply for asylum in the first European country they had entered. But at the last minute, their deportation was put on hold.
To now withdraw him brutally in the manner that they wish to do so, to go to Germany and restart his education again in another language would be detrimental to his progress.
The Home Office says the family has an existing asylum claim in Germany, so it's only right, they say, their claim is considered by the German authorities. Now Luan's future lies in the hands of a High Court judge who will make the final decision. Seema Katecha, BBC News, Derby.
A 900-year-old skeleton found in Hampshire has revealed important clues about the history of leprosy. Researchers say the remains of the man, thought to be a religious pilgrim, were excavated at a burial site in Winchester. Scientific detective work suggests he caught the highly contagious skin disease on his travels to a shrine in Spain and brought it back with him to the UK. Many survivors of genocide are still facing discrimination because of their religion or ethnicity, according to research to mark Holocaust Memorial Day. Across the world, there have been ceremonies to remember the millions of people who died in the Second World War and in other genocides since. Our correspondent Holly Hamilton went to meet one survivor and to hear his story.
The door opened, 3 German soldiers came in. He took out his revolver and put it to my head. And people ask me, what does it feel like when you got a gun at your head? What did you do?
This wasn't the first time Gabor Lacko came face to face with death, and it wouldn't be the last.
Death was all around us all the time. Nothing was new, nothing was surprising. We were prepared for everything. It's made from bits and pieces of material because...
His first yellow star, worn to identify him as a Jew, was made by his mother, a piece of history he's kept to this day.
I never forget it. The first day I was wearing it, I had a medical appointment, and at the top of the road, a lady who saw me trying to hide it with a newspaper under my arm said, "Little boy, don't cover it. There's nothing to be ashamed of." The yellow armband my father wore.
Like many survivors, Gabor waited for more than 20 years before talking about his experiences, motivated by a desire to help people understand what happened.
I don't think young people appreciate how lucky they are. They worry about their mobile telephone and their game consoles. They don't know what problems are. They don't know what it is when bombs fall from the sky and you don't know if you survive it. When an occupying army can take you away.
It wasn't until 1956 that Gabor decided to move to England.
Well, in those days, people looked at refugees with different eyes and they tried to make us welcome. I started a new life and I got on with it. With friends who went through the same. Whatever is the conversation, after a while, it always turns to the past. We all have memories. We've got to live with them.
Now, it's been a week of comebacks at the Australian Open this week. The Williams sisters will meet each other in the women's final. Roger Federer is through to the men's, and he could be facing his old rival, Rafa Nadal. Andy Swiss reports.
So would it be another day to roll back the years? At 30, Rafael Nadal's pomp, like Roger Federer's, seemed to have passed. Yet now an almost fantasy final between them beckoned, if Nadal could beat Grigor Dimitrov. The Spaniard's only recently returned from a wrist injury. You'd scarcely have guessed it. Nadal cruised to the first set, but his opponent, once nicknamed Baby Fed, started playing like the grown-up version. Soon it was 1-1 While the fans favoured Nadal, fortune seemed to prefer Dimitrov. How's this for the luck of the bounce? But Nadal held his nerve, edging a third set tiebreak. But Dimitrov was far from done. Another tiebreak, and this time he took it, dragging a now marathon match into a decider. Earlier in Melbourne, there'd been some British success in the wheelchair doubles. Gordon Reid's victory alongside Belgium's Joachim Gerard, meaning he's now won all 4 Grand Slam titles. But for Nadal and Dimitrov, the battle for glory continues. After over 4 hours of enthralling drama, a place in the final is still theirs for the taking. Andy Swiss, BBC News.
Let's look at the weather now. Here's Thomas Schaffenacker. Thomas.
Rita, thank you. I've been shivering, you've been shivering. It's been absolutely freezing for the last few days. We've had fog, grey clouds and temperatures around freezing even at midday. And this picture really says it all. But things are about to change. Now, it's not cold and grey everywhere right now. We have got some sunshine around, but that sun is going to be replaced by thicker clouds coming off the ocean over the next few days. In fact, that means that the temperatures are going to be rising, and even this evening, when you're going to be taking a walk, the temperatures you'll feel won't be quite as low as what they have been in the last day or so. Now, the clouds out in the Atlantic are ready and waiting to come our way, and with this also we have much milder conditions, much milder compared to what we've had, because it's still not going to be that desperately warm, at least in the short term. Now, as far as this afternoon is concerned, those temperatures are still around single figures. We're talking about 9-7 degrees in the south, still pretty nippy across some northern and central areas. We've got a bit of freezing fog around, but through this evening and overnight, that process begins where we sort of introduce that less cold air coming in off the ocean. It's a frost-free night for sure across many southern areas. In the north, just about cold enough with that rain, a bit of sleet and snow mixing in. But really, as we head into Saturday morning, we start to see that Atlantic weather winning. So we're pushing in that oceanic air in, and those temperatures really will feel, it won't feel anywhere near as dry, as bitter as it has done in the last few days. But there's a bit of a split. This is a scene, say, around midday. Now, notice that eastern areas are still pretty cloudy, going through that transition into the slightly milder air. Western areas already in that sunshine, but with that, also some showers coming in. So not a desperately mild day on the way tomorrow, but better if you don't like the cold. And then as we go through Saturday night, that process continues. Those winds off the Atlantic bring in that milder air with a few showers. Now, unfortunately, we're going to have to pay for it, because we're not going to get the milder air for nothing. It does mean weather fronts coming in, and look at that. Temperatures already getting up to double figures across some of these southern areas, whereas in the north, still touch of frost, still a little bit on the crispy side, but on balance, not that bad. Now, as we go through Monday and into next week, it does look as though these weather fronts and this Atlantic air is going to be winning. And look at that, it's all about the double figures. Those double figures is what many of us care about, because it's going to feel a lot less cold.
Thank you, Thomas. And a reminder now of our main story this lunchtime. Theresa May is preparing to meet Donald Trump, the first world leader to meet the new president. Well, that's all from the BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One, we can now join the BBC's news teams where you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.